Hello, guys, and welcome to the Prime Performance and Nutrition Podcast. A podcast that's finally got a name after dragging my heels for a wee bit beforehand. We are joined today by Chloe, the Cam Gut dietitian. Seen at a seminar from Chloe when I was doing a full day seminar on nutrition during the menopause, and what she had to say was fascinating, so I thought I would ask her on here. Could you give us a brief introduction, Chloe, and a bit about your background?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. So I am a dietitian. I've been a dietitian for over 10 years. I worked in the NHS for many years, specialising in the gut, so gastroenterology, so seeing things like IBS and complex things like diverticular disease, inflammatory bowel disease. And where I am now is I run my own business. And I see patients that have all sorts of gut conditions, but I also see people that have something called histamine intolerance and mast cell activation syndrome and all the interlinking conditions with that. I came to specialize in this area just because my husband has MCAS and histamine intolerance, and I've had my own gut health journey as well. A lot of my patients maybe are women that are going through the perimenopause and the menopause. The seminar you saw me at was talking all about gut health and the menopause. And that is where I link into that, really.
Right, well, we will just start at the very start. As I said to you before I came on, I want these podcasts to be quite educational and informative for people, and less like a scripted interview. So we'll just start at the very start. Could you explain briefly what histamine intolerance and MCAS is?
Absolutely. I'll do one at a time, otherwise it's going to get very muddled.
Yeah.
So histamine intolerance is basically where your body can't regulate the amount of histamine you have in your body properly. So histamine is a chemical messenger. We all have it. It is involved in things like the production of stomach acid and our response to inflammation, infections. So we need it. We just don't need too much of it. And usually our body is really good at regulating it. We have breakdown processes. We have an enzyme in our gut that breaks down the histamine in the food that we eat. Because not only can we produce histamine, actually we get histamine from foods. So things like fermented products, processed meats, aged meats, a whole range of foods that contain it. So actually, we need to be able to break it down in our bodies. And there seems to be a link between the perimenopause and histamine intolerance potentially. We have not any studies on that link really, apart from we know that hormones affect histamine. The higher your estrogen is, the more it pushes your own histamine up, and therefore you can get symptoms. And the symptoms of histamine intolerance can literally affect your whole body. So you may have gut symptoms, you may have fatigue, headaches, rhinitis, so like stuffy, congested nose, lots of sneezing. You might have skin rashes, but I would say not everyone presents the same way. So you can get really, really different symptoms. Mast cell activation syndrome is an overproduction of histamine, but also loads of other chemicals. So imagine your mast cells, which usually would respond to an infection, or if you have a primary allergy, and they'd usually respond really appropriately. What happens in mast cell activation syndrome is they're on high alert all the time. They think there's an invader in your body all of the time rather than just for a short period of time. And they release histamine, loads of other chemicals. You can get whole body symptoms, as I described for histamine intolerance, but for some people, they can get things like anaphylaxis as well, and symptoms can be much more extreme. And not only do they react to food, they might react to like chemicals in the environment, perfumes, smells, and lots of other things. So they can, histamine intolerance, MCAS can look quite similar, but they are very different.
So, what would you say for because I've got some women at the moment that are around the perimenopause age, and their response to nutrition seems to differ largely as they get older. They don't seem to respond to the usual calories in, calories out, although that is a fundamental thing of weight loss. They tend to respond better to feeding their body more sort of like a more whole food diet with slightly more calories. I know on that seminar that day that says that's to do with a stress response and that. Although you see there's no studies, what do you see in terms of histamine intolerance with people in perimenopause, and what would be sort of signs and things to look out for?
Yeah, so the patients that get sent to me have often seen a specialist menopause doctor who have suggested that histamine is potentially an issue. What has brought them to that thought is often that they have tried to increase the estrogen in their HRT, and instead of making things better, it's made it much worse, because what that's done is it's pushed up their histamine as well. They may also have noticed that when they have foods high in histamine, so things like tomatoes, bacon, fermented foods, that actually instead of their symptoms getting better, things have got much worse. And it's really tricky because the symptoms of histamine intolerance can also look like the symptoms of perimenopause. So the symptoms are hugely overlapping. And the only way of us really unpicking it is often the doctor might have already reduced their estrogen to reduce their histamine from that. But then we might look at things like a 2 to 4 week low histamine diet to see if symptoms improve. And that is really the only diagnostic tool we have at the moment to say, yes, you've got a histamine intolerance. There's no blood test they can do. There's no single test that really confirms that diagnosis. So it's an elimination diet that's going to do that for them. And like you say, you're not just histamine. There's so many other things to think about in the perimenopause. So often these women may be struggling with their weight, or also their gut symptoms. So we might want to think about fibre. And there is evidence that fibre can help weight management as much as calorie counting. And I think that's so important for this group of women as well, when we're thinking, actually, we need to keep your bowels regular, or for some of them, they're experiencing diarrhea. We might want more fibre to try and help with that. So there's lots of other bits to think about rather than let's just look at histamine.
Yeah, and kind of like what you're saying about fibre and things. I think in general, not just with that population, I think in general there is too much focus, especially like social media and things as well. Now there's too much focus on just calories in versus calories out, and people get almost hyper focused on that, thinking the more calories they pull out, the greater the weight loss will be, and it doesn't quite work that way. And people are actually quite surprised a lot of the times when I give them much more calories than they think they need, and it's from like fresh fruits, veg, whole foods, without getting pigeonholed into a sort of style of dieting. And then they start sleeping better, weight starts dropping off them, and they're like, but this is more calories. But it's simply because there's more to the equation than calories. It's an important part, but it's not the only part. And I think that the obsession with calorie counting these days, and especially with social media, it makes that a lot worse. So people's go-to in times of like perimenopause or whatever is what they've always done. Pull calories out, and obviously increase exercise. And if they've got all these other things going on, then they're just going to make themselves ill as well.
Yeah, and I think it's the culture we grew up in as well. For anyone that grew up in sort of the 90s, calorie counting was just everywhere, and we've learned so much more about all the other things that are important in weight management, not just calories in, calories out. And there's so many people that doesn't work for. We don't talk enough about fibre. Most of us are eating far less fibre than we need to, and actually our gut bacteria plays a weight in our weight management. And there was a big study called the Pound Study that basically looked at how much fibre people were eating, the effect on their weight, and actually it had a really positive impact on people's weight. So I think we need to talk a lot more about fibre. And I'm not just talking fruit and veg, there's loads of other ways you can get it. So things like whole grain carbohydrates, beans and pulses, yes, fruit and vegetables, but it doesn't just have to be fruit and vegetables. And the thing that I often see is people just cutting out all carbohydrates, thinking they're bad for me. All I need is protein. Whereas actually those whole grain carbohydrates are so vital for getting us the fiber we need, getting us the energy we need, especially if we're exercising as well.
I have been guilty of that in the past. I personally like keto diets. I think there's a place for them, but I always say to people, I think whatever nutrition plan you're going to go with should be situational. It should be based on what your current needs are at the time. I think everything. I think there can be therapeutic benefits of using ketosis, but it shouldn't be everybody's go-to straight away. It can be used sparingly as a tool, but again, with focus on vegetables and things to make sure your fibre intake, things like that, is adequate.
Like you say, diets should be personalised. They shouldn't be, this diet is for everyone, because if someone has really bad gut problems, the last thing I want to do is then take a massive food group out that is produced, like giving them loads of fibre, unless we absolutely have to. So I think you've hit the nail on the head in the fact that we need personalised dietary advice for people rather than blanket recommendations for everybody.
Yeah. I think everything works until it doesn't. But when people are in this sort of like say the perimenopause age or something, they've got to start looking at nutrition through a more holistic lens, I suppose, than anything else, because they're trying to actually treat symptoms of dysfunction as well as maybe trying to lose weight or something at the same time. So it totally changes the landscape of what they're doing if they've maybe got gut dysfunction or any of these things going on as well. It kind of makes things a bit more complex for them.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not really complicated things that need to be done. Sometimes it is people just want to optimize their health while they're having these horrible perimenopause symptoms. And there are really like basic, simple changes that they can often make for their symptoms rather than it having to be really complicated. Because often midlife is busy. Sometimes they have children or elderly relatives to care for. Life is hectic. The last thing I want to do is make things more complicated. So actually, it's not always complicated things I suggest. And when it comes to things like gut health, it might be just adding extra fibre at your breakfast. So things like ground flaxseed, or if someone's got constipation, I often tell them to add 1 or 2 kiwi. So it might just be adding stuff to their diet rather than taking things away, and it might be 1 or 2 changes rather than here's a huge complicated diet that you have to follow, which might then cause more stress. And actually we know that stress and gut health are massively interconnected. So the more stressed you are, the worse your gut health is. The worse your gut health is, the more stressed you are. So actually that's often a key part of what I help people with as well, is actually looking at that gut-brain connection, trying to calm everything down as well.
Yeah, well, that was going to be one of my questions later on, because obviously the clues in the name of what you've called yourself and called your website and things like that, the Calm Gut Dietitian. So, but I don't think people realise quite how much of an interplay there is between the gut-brain axis. So, I was going to ask that later on, but we'll just circle back. We'll just go there just now. So,
yeah. So there's a massive connection. Actually, when you're stressed, your gut bacteria can change. Your gut and your brain communicate all of the time. And with things like irritable bowel syndrome, we do have evidence to show that things like yoga, gut-directed hypnotherapy, diaphragmatic breathing, all of those things that target that gut-brain connection can actually be really helpful in calming gut symptoms. So those are things that I talk about a lot with people, perimenopause wise. Like if there's a histamine intolerance, stress can hugely exacerbate the amount of histamine you're producing. So I talk a lot about doing things people enjoy, meditation, calming your nervous system down. There's some amazing apps out there I often use, things like Insight Timer, Headspace, that can be really, really useful for people with any of these conditions, but also just people struggling with stress during the perimenopause or any time in their life, really, and trying to prevent some of that that feedback loop that happens.
Yeah, so Headspace, I've actually just downloaded that a couple of days ago because I'm kind of into like breath work and things as well, but I've never actually learned, if you like, learned the different practices of breathing, learned the different, like, I'm in at a point where I'll just maybe throw it on YouTube and just follow the guided breathing or the yoga or whatever. But I actually want to learn more about it, so I just downloaded Headspace. But I was on holiday. The day I was coming back from holiday, actually, I was meant to go through a bit of breath work on the plane, but I fell asleep before I could do it. So I've not actually got around to it. Yeah. So circling back to the nutrition, what it was meaning by complex was more just the complex symptoms, as opposed to complex dieting, because that's kind of what I always try to make people think as well. Like, nutrition is simple, although there's a whole science out of it. It's simple, and like I wouldn't. It doesn't matter if you're plant based or omnivorous, or if you are sticking to mostly like 90% whole foods and less packaged foods, then you kind of can't go wrong if you're eating plenty of fruits, plenty of veg, some lean meats or beans and pulses if you're like vegetarian or whatever, or not even necessarily, you don't have to be vegetarian, but I'm just meaning that's an alternate protein source for vegans and things. But what I think people, especially in the UK, are completely disconnected from what real food is anymore, and everybody lives on convenience or grabs stuff on the way to work or eats out of a box or eats out of a container, and whenever you try and steer people towards just a more whole food dense diet, they'll automatically seem to see it as some kind of special diet nowadays, but when realistically it's just eating whole foods. But I was just on holiday there last week, and I noticed that hugely. Like, the food at the hotel was great, but it was all Mediterranean. We were in Greece, so it was all Mediterranean style diet food. It was like your grilled lean meats, your rice, salads, plenty of Greek yogurt. It's all things I would eat anyway, so I never had an issue eating. But there was a lot of people moaning about the food, and I was just, that thought just kept coming back in my head. It's just because people are so disconnected from what actual food is, that they struggle to go back to basics, I think.
Yeah, and we have so much evidence that the Mediterranean diet is such a healthy way of eating, and it can help so many things: heart health, gut health. So, like you say, trying to avoid processed foods wherever you can be really helpful in going towards that more Mediterranean style of eating. Life is busy, isn't it? People want easy things to do, but there are cheap ways of doing a whole food Mediterranean type diet, like beans and pulses. You don't have to soak for hours. You absolutely can if you want to, but you can use a can of beans and pulses, throw that into stuff. Like whole grain things like quinoa and brown rice and things like that. They do pouches now with minimal added ingredients where you can just put them in the microwave. So you can still do easy, but eat whole foods that are going to nourish your body. But often the people I see it's planning they struggle with. Like, lives are so busy, it's sitting down and actually thinking about what they're going to eat for the week that's the difficulty. And it's something I struggle with as well with a family. It's just trying to juggle that around everything else, isn't it? But I do think sitting down at a weekend and saying, this is what we're going to eat for the week, this is the ingredients we need, can be really helpful in terms of stopping you just going, oh, well, I don't know what to eat, let's get a takeaway, or I don't know what to eat, let's have a ready meal out of the cupboard or something like that. So actually planning is really important. And there's loads of stuff that can help you with that now, isn't there? There's lots of like meal delivery places that can help you with planning, but from fresh ingredients rather than from processed. There's loads of recipes online that you could probably use AI to do your meal plan for you if you told them what foods you like. So we're lucky in that sense, but life is just so busy.
Yeah, so that's probably one thing that if that's sort of one part of what your business focuses on is the calm side of things, is trying to de-stress. I noticed, again, on holiday there, I said to my wife that there was like a Greek family, well, they were Greek or Turkish, or they were Mediterranean anyway, and they were at the hotel, and it was the evening meal, and there was about, I would say maybe 15 to 20 of them around the table. Young kids from 2, 3 up to like grandparents' age. And the whole table, the whole time they were having their meal, didn't have one device between them. They didn't have their head in the device at all. And the young kids were sitting at the end of the table with what looked like one of the grandparents or an uncle or whatever. And the young kids were like deep in conversation with him at the end of the table. And I was just like, in the UK, like, or all the other British families around with, us included, all had a device in their hand. Everybody had a device in their hand, and it's just that ability. Nobody switches off these days at all, ever, and that I think that adds a layer of perceived stress and busyness because nobody actually takes the time out to chill with families and that. But it was just something interesting that I observed, and when you mentioned the Mediterranean diet there. I think people's lives are, when it comes to planning and things, it's often not as busy as they perceive it to be. But there's a lot of activities like that as well, scrolling and things like that, and never sitting down with families and things.
Yeah, there's a lot of distractions, aren't there? And I think, like you say, our attitude to food in this country is very different to other areas. And when they've looked at studies of like the blue zone where people are like healthiest in the world and live the longest, actually it's not just the food, it's their lifestyle, the stress, the eating together as families, the socializing. And I'm not immune to this. I have relied on screens for my child when I've needed to, but I think
we totally have as well. But our youngest, he's at the age where he's 13 this year, so on that holiday there, we've done just as much arguing with him as we did anything else, because we were constantly like, get that out of your hand, Mum, we'll be able to do something. All we wanted to do was sit on a device. Occasionally he'd be jumping in a pool or be up for, we went out on bikes all day one day, enjoyed that, but we had a constant battle with him to get a device out of his hand. But me and my wife both said, like, we were guilty of that as well. When they're younger, there you go. But it was just something I observed, and it was because it was a large family, and not one of them had a device in their hand at all the whole meal. And the interactions, obviously, with the youngest and the oldest and things, it was just like, it's kind of seems to be missing from our culture. And as you touched on there, when I've read about the Mediterranean diet at uni and things, it is their culture and things as well that play into their lifespan and health span, as well as not just their diet as well, and walking after meals and things like that as well.
It culturally, I think our attitude to food, like you say, needs to change, and eating together, and there's many people in this country that do that, but as a whole, I think the Mediterranean attitude towards food and stuff is much healthier.
Back to the calm aspect, the gut brain axis. Do you find when clients come to you or patients come to you in perimenopause that removing stress from their life has an immediate impact on their physical health and their gut health, basically?
Yeah, it's huge. Sometimes people are very aware that they're stressed or that something stressful is happening in your life, and you're not always able to remove that, but how you can change is your response to that and how you deal with stress, and making sure, like, time for self-care as well. Even if meditation's not your thing, going for a walk on your lunch break rather than eating your sandwiches at your desk while you're trying to work, which loads of us do. That doesn't give our body what it needs to digest that food. What we need our body to do is our parasympathetic system to activate, so we're in that rest and digest state rather than that constant fight or flight, where we're just not able to digest because our energy goes into other processes. So yeah, it can definitely play a huge role. And some people come to me with like IBS saying, I want to do the low FODMAP diet, which is quite a complicated restrictive diet. And actually, when we dig down, it's like, well, actually, do you need to do this when actually stress is what's gone on for you and seems to be your main trigger? So are we better off focusing on how do you reduce that stress in your life? So yeah, it can have an immediate impact. And it might be that people need a bit of dietary change as well. It's not going to cure everything, and some people still have issues with certain foods and need to make dietary changes. But it's a huge part for a lot of people.
Yeah. The reason I asked that is because I see it almost instantly in people. My approach with people, my approach with anybody, apart from, like, I've got a lot of clients using GLP-1s at the moment. So if they are on a GLP-1, I wouldn't take this approach because they wouldn't have the appetite to actually put in enough food. But what I would normally do with people, what I see quite a lot is, especially when we say we would keep this sort of menopause theme, so we'll stick to the women in their 40s sort of thing. So women, what I see when women hit their 40s is, like, back to the sort of the calorie restriction thing, is if they're hitting that time of life and they're needing to lose weight, they will go back to almost default practices that they've done in their 20s and 30s, and it'll be low calorie diet and it'll be lots of high intensity exercise. So normally when I start speaking to them, I'm like, no, you're caught in, like you just said it there, you're caught in that sympathetic driven sort of fight or flight. We need to get you out of that before we even start thinking about weight loss. Although weight loss normally does occur during that switch over, I try and get people not to even think about weight loss first. I try and get people to sort of overfeed on, like, a Mediterranean style, sort of Asian style, like stir fries, lots of whole foods, and I'll pull their training back or tell them only do maybe 2-3 workouts max, weight workouts. And if they're doing anything like high intensity interval training or anything like that, or any sort of class, it sounds quite hypocritical for me to say this, because I used to run and still do run high intensity exercise classes, but for that group of people at that moment in time, I'm like, you're just digging yourself a bigger hole to get out of. You're not going to recover from that type of exercise. And a couple of weeks of eating slightly better, eating slightly more, focusing more on basic strength training and doing tons of walking and stuff like you probably promote as well. The difference in them is huge, like massive, in the space of a couple of weeks. And people come to me and go, I can't believe weight's dropping and I'm eating more. And I'm like, I'll be more calm. There's lots of other things physiologically happening as well, just by simply pulling you out of that chronically stressed state, which can lead to a lot of other health issues as well further down the line.
Yeah, it is huge, isn't it? And something we don't always think about.
Could you give me some like, what sort of basic nutrition, and I know this is probably going to be a hard question to ask because everybody's going to be different. We've already touched on this, every single case is going to be different. But what would be the basics of like a woman in their 40s, or similar to what I just said, right? A woman in their 40s, perimenopausal, comes to you, she's got gut issues, things like that. What would be I just sort of laid out sort of what I do with people, and there seems to be a massive difference straight away. What would be your first protocols nutritionally and sort of lifestyle intervention type stuff?
So I would be looking for if she was getting enough fibre in the first place. So what is the diet like, overall diet, rather than just one day? I like to look at how many different plants they're eating a week. So there was this amazing study called the American Gut Project. It looked at how healthy people's guts were, depending on how many plants they ate a week. And 30 was thought to be the magic number. If you ate more than 30 different plants a week, your gut was thought to be healthier. And that included herbs and spices, nuts and seeds, beans and pulses, whole grains, so all of those whole foods that you've already talked about. So sometimes, depending on the patient, I might get people to track that and almost work out how many plant-based points they're getting a week. And if they're not, like, can we challenge it? If they're only having 10, can we double it by the next appointment, or can we triple it? And use that as a bit of a tracking mechanism. So it's just a way of working towards that more whole food diet. So fibre is definitely something that I would be looking at. How many different types of plants they're getting? Are they always eating the same things? Like, can we diversify it? Because the more diverse your diet, the more different things you're eating, plant-based wise, the more diverse your gut bacteria is, which we think is a good thing. I'd also be looking at actually how much are you drinking. That fibre isn't going to work, isn't going to give you a healthy stool unless you're drinking enough to go with it. Are we drinking enough fluids? Like water, tea, coffee, herbal teas, all count. But also how much alcohol is going in. Like, if we're drinking too much alcohol, that's going to have a huge effect on our gut, our overall health, and potentially our perimenopause symptoms as well. So fibre, fluid, I'd be assessing for. Specific nutrients are really important as well. So things like healthy fats. Your risk of heart disease increases after the menopause. So we want to look at protecting that. So healthy sources of fats, things like oily fish, avocado, nuts, seeds, extra virgin olive oil, rapeseed oil. So we'd look at what's going to help with that heart health. So unsaturated fat. I'd also be assessing for bone health. So we know your bone health is more at risk after menopause. So are they getting enough calcium? Lots of people are on more plant-based sources of dairy now, so the alternative milk. So I'd want to make sure, are they choosing the ones that are fortified with calcium? Are they getting enough for what their body needs? So they're probably the main things. I'd always be led by what the patient wants. So, like, what are they looking for? Are they looking for an improvement in gut symptoms? Are they looking just to optimize their gut health? Are they wanting to lose weight? And that would change the goals that we set. But those are things that I'd be thinking about when I see someone.
So would you automatically just say that specific client was looking to just say she came to you with the goal of losing weight? Would you automatically try and improve gut health and things anyway?
Yeah. That's generally my approach. And generally my approach is I would try and avoid calorie counting where possible, and I would go in more with whole foods, fibre, improving gut health, looking at the stress aspect. And I find that is often enough to help people lose weight without having to think about calories.
Yeah. I don't. I speak to clients about calories, but I don't like it because people oversimplify it so much. I try to get people into. Have you read any of the studies about the high energy flux diet?
No, I haven't.
Well, it's basically more food and more activity as well, but the activity is just like steps, day-to-day sort of activity. It's not like tons of high intensity exercise and more food, but I try and get people to take more that approach, if you like, to actually increase their food and let their weight sort of come down as a byproduct of increasing both sides of the equation sort of thing. Because I find myself in the past, and it's kind of reared its head the past year or so as well, that I've probably got borderline eating disorder issues as well. And when I start really focusing on calories and body weight and that, I become obsessive about it. And I see the same sort of patterns in a lot of people, like not just some people, like the majority of people. So that's kind of my gripe with the speaking about calories. Although it is a fundamental part of the equation, it's not necessarily just you need to pull out all the food you're eating, and that's where people tend to go with it. So yeah, I did have and again, just to sort of, we'll just moan about social media again for a minute. When you were speaking about plants, again, I said earlier on that like I'm a fan of like keto diets and things, but in certain situations, and not sort of year round as a lifestyle either. But when people are trying to get information from social media, there's been such a rise in short form content these days that people are getting 30 to 60 seconds of information and then trying to base an opinion on what to do over a certain outcome over this 30 to 60 seconds. And then you've got things like people that'll be maybe keto or carnivore saying things like plants are trying to kill you, and then people are automatically scared of sort of to add fruit into their diets, or fructose makes you fat and things like that. And it's just like it's scary that for people in the age of information, we should be able to access much better quality of information, but because of short form content, the quality of information seems to be going down for people rather than up, because they're trying to get their information from on a complex issue, whether it be mast cell activation or histamine intolerance or whatever. They're trying to get a bigger picture from a 30-second clip, and it's just impossible.
Yeah, and I'd say in that situation, if you can go to reputable sources of information, either see a registered health professional, see someone like a registered nutritionist, to get that personalised advice for all of these conditions. You're not going to be the same as someone else with that condition. There are places you can go, like charity websites. So there's Mast Cell Action that supports those with MCAS, which uses health professionals to get appropriate information out there. There are gut charities as well that do exactly the same. So stuff like Guts UK is really useful. So I would say make sure you get your information from a reputable source, because I do see people absolutely terrified of food that maybe have borderline disordered eating, but that has come from digesting some of this social media content that tells them that these foods are something to be scared of rather than enjoyed. And actually, one single food, unless it's a poisonous fruit and vegetable that we wouldn't be eating, is not going to kill you. Like, we need to be looking at people's overall diet. If you have a piece of cake, that is not the end of the world. It's really what else you're eating in that week. And actually, food's meant to be enjoyed as well. Like, we should be able to go for a meal and have things that are enjoyable, as long as most of our diet is whole foods, is healthy, is giving what we need. We should be able to go and have treat foods.
Yeah, I always say that to clients as well when they're like, I've had such and such, I'm going to track it. I'm like, no, a couple of times a week, just go out socially, because the social aspect, as we just spoke about, like in the Mediterranean and things, the social aspect of eating is important, and having a strong, healthy social life is important in general. So I'm always saying to clients as well, like a couple of times a week, go out, eat what you want, don't worry about it, don't track it, don't focus on it, simply enjoy it and move on. But back to what we were saying about the sort of the social media stuff, it's a shame too, because people are searching for information with the best intentions. Like I I had a conversation with a woman a few weeks ago, and she was worried about her blood sugar and being insulin resistance, and she was worried about eating fruit because of that. And I says, well, fruit is not going to make you diabetic. Like, you shouldn't be scared to eat fruit because it contains sugar, in the fear that you might become diabetic. So I popped into the group chat about it, and it's one of my pet hates as well. It's why I don't really speak about things like insulin resistance and things on social media, because a lot of the people that do try and explain it, they don't even understand it themselves, and it just leads to more confusion. So I was trying to say to her, like fruit, well, for a start, fructose isn't going to have a high insulin response anyway, but it's not glucose independent glucose spikes that are going to make you diabetic. It's having chronically elevated glucose and not getting in the cell that's going to make you diabetic. And I'm just trying to say to them, like, try not to like take everything you see on social media as gospel. And just because fruit contains sugar, you shouldn't be like scared. And the thing is, she wasn't even diabetic. She's just obviously, her doctors told her she's trending towards that. So I honestly think, like, with the snippets of information that people were getting, it could potentially make things like that worse. Because
and I think that blood sugar conversation is huge, isn't it? I used to be a diabetes dietitian. Actually, you need the gene in the first place to even develop diabetes, and there's so many reasons why that gene might be triggered and you develop diabetes. And one of them might be age. Like, just as we get older, our pancreas can wear out. And I have people diagnosed in their 80s with diabetes, and it's not necessarily anything you've done. Yes, there are preventative things like having a healthy diet, being active, but having that one bit of cake or that one piece of fruit is not going to cause you to have diabetes. It's genetic. But I think there's so much talk about blood sugars online and spiking blood sugars. And actually, for most people, we just need to be thinking about the foods that we're eating. We don't need to be thinking, are we having a blood sugar spike then? Because actually our body's really equipped at dealing with that blood sugar spike. We have those processes that deal with that. But there's so much talk about that online, isn't there, by people that aren't necessarily qualified or understand it fully to discuss it.
Yeah, it's a massive area of interest of mine as well, but because, like, I've always felt my body doesn't deal with carbohydrates very well, and as I found out at uni, my mum had gestational diabetes when she was pregnant with me. I knew that anyway, but as I found out at uni that she would have passed the gene on to me because she was pregnant. So I've always kind of been aware of developing that, which puts me 6 times more likely to develop it. My mum's type 2 as well. So it's kind of an area of interest of mine for my own health. But I just like, because basically what people are trying to explain in 30 seconds is cellular biology, really. And if they've not got a proper grasp of it, it's impossible to explain it in 30 seconds anyway. But if they've not got a proper grasp of it as well, it just leads to confusion. So then, for example, that woman in particular, she may or may not end up going, right, I need to drop all my carbs. And if that's not done properly, then normally when people drop all their carbs, they just plummet their calories through the ground, and then they'll only manage a day or two, and then they'll binge, which will make their issue 10 times worse than just having a few bits of fruit, or, as you say, like a bit of cake went out or whatever. And I think this type of information drives people to extremes. And when it comes to nutrition and dieting in general, people already tend to have that mindset of extremes already. So this kind of just adds fuel. It just adds fuel to the fire for people. Which is, well, generally what I see anyway.
Yeah. And like you say, most of these people that are concerned about this through social media are people that don't have diabetes anyway. So it's adding a concern that they don't necessarily need to be worried about at that time point.
Is there anything else? No, that was perfect, Chloe. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. Is there anything else you would like to touch on before we wrap this up?
No, but I think just sort of summarising what we've been saying is get personalised advice. Don't rely on these 60-second clips on social media. And if you are using them for information, make sure you follow the appropriate accounts and make sure these people actually have qualifications to be advising you in that area. But thanks so much for having me.
Thank you very much, Chloe. Where could people catch you if anybody's interested in, or anybody has symptoms of like what you specialise in or deal with? Where could people find you? What's your social medias and things?
So I'm on Instagram, so at the Calm Gut Dietitian. My website is thecalmgutdietitian.com, so you can get me on my website or on Instagram or Facebook. I have not moved across to TikTok yet. I am not ready for that.
I kind of did. I think it's possibly a better platform than Instagram. Because Instagram, I don't tend to use. I do use it. I do post it, but it's just a cross post from Facebook, really. So anything I put on Facebook will automatically go there. But in terms of like views and things like that, and Instagram's never been great for me. Whereas TikTok, the very little we've used it, you seem to get more exposure on TikTok, and then people would only see that because of the way the algorithm works, the For You page. Well, that seems to be the way everything's moving on Instagram and things as well. But your content, for example, would only get served up to people that are suffering from like the issues that you deal with. So, But I think everything's following TikTok's algorithm, is it? So, but I think TikTok looks like a better platform. But as you say, it's the same. I'm trying to juggle about 5 different platforms with no technical knowledge. That's how this has took 2 weeks to even come about this conversation. But no, thank you very much, Chloe. Thank you for your time. Would I be able to get you to stay on just a few seconds after I stop this to make sure the episode's fully uploaded? But thank you very much, and that'll be us, guys. Cheers.